Beyond the Fence Line, a podcast brought to you by the Texas Agricultural Land Trust. Created by landowners for landowners, we're proud to play a role in conserving the Texas legacy of wide open spaces.
Hi, I'm Sandra Velarde, and I lead our fundraising efforts here at TALT. Gifts that are given to TALT stay right here in Texas, protecting open space that will be here for generations to come. Giving to TALT means investing in communities, clean water, and clean air that benefit us all. Please consider a small recurring donation today and be part of that movement that is keeping Texas big, wide, and open. Visit our website to learn more at www.txaglandtrust.org/support.
Well, welcome back to Beyond the Fence Line. Today we're going to be talking about private property rights and this aspect of championing the rights of private landowners. And we have, I think the perfect guest with us today. We have Jessica Karlsruher with TRED, with the Texas Real Estate Advocacy Defense Coalition. So thanks, Jessica, for joining us.
Yeah, Chad, thank you for having me today.
Well, let's kind of dive in and kind of maybe share a little bit in the overview of TRED Coalition and why it was formed and what you guys are all about.
Sure. So as you mentioned, TRED stands for Texas Real Estate Advocacy and Defense. And the essence of it is don't tread on me. And TRED was formed in 2017 from some land attorneys who were constantly fighting one-off issues with landowners. And we're thinking, well, why isn't there an organization that represents landowners in rural communities? And so TRED was formed. And we are member-based, nonpartisan, and then advocate on behalf of landowners at the local, state, and federal level. Since 2019, I came on board in November of that year, and we have since broadened our scope to be encompassing of rural communities as a whole. And really the origin of that was because of COVID, quite frankly, recognizing that when people are quarantined, they have less access, and rural communities were already suffering with depleted resources, not enough access to certain things. So beyond what we focus on with water conservation, property taxes, we kind of branched out to encompass rural health, education, what's happening with urban encroachment and green spaces. And especially since, because people were not able to do what they did on a normal basis, they relied on the great outdoors. And so we saw a need to really, have a bigger voice in that conversation.
I think that's great. I mean, my background, I'm from rural Texas, right? I'm not much more rural than Lone, Texas, and understanding that community and that aspect, and we're sort of kind of, out there and kind of forgotten a lot of ways. So I really appreciate you and TRED and kind of broadening that, because I think we need more voices for us for sure. Maybe dive in a little bit, Jessica, and maybe talk a little bit more of, what are some key issues that you're working on right now? What are those hot issues, kind of those main things that you're really focused on?
Well, so coming off of this last legislative session, we were very much engaged in the eminent domain conversation, and specifically pipeline routing reform. And I'll kind of, take a step back. So for the first few years that TRED was, growing and building its base, a lot of what we focused on were ag valuations to help offset property taxes and just other nuanced issues that landowners had. And so it wasn't until the fall of 2018 where some landowners in the Hill Country received a letter of condemnation that a pipeline was going to be coming through. And so that kind of coincided with the session of 2019, where some of the organizations like Texas Wildlife Association, the Cattle Raisers and Farm Bureau had been working on eminent domain reform for, the past 6 years. And so this became very heated because there's only one other pipeline that's come through the Hill Country, and that was the Longhorn pipeline. Otherwise, they traditionally follow a corridor, so to speak. And the reason for that is, when you're going through the Hill Country, there is a significant amount of water sources, right? You have all of these aquifers, you have karst features, you have endangered species. So to be putting a pipe in the ground was, what a lot of folks saw as not the best thing to do in this particular area of Texas. So that was a hot and heavy discussion. I fortunately missed all of those fireworks. But we didn't really get anything accomplished during that legislative session. And so when I came on board in fall of 2019, we continued to have those discussions, bring those folks back together. Learning, being new into the space, what had these other, peer organizations done in terms of working toward reform, and what was going to be some sound policy for pipeline routing and just eminent domain in general. So, fast forward to this past session, we were successful, quite frankly, passing a handful of bills that I thought were steps in the right direction to add in extra protections for landowners. And that was just kind of in the general eminent domain space. But unfortunately, pipeline routing, there was one particular bill carried by Representative Aaron Zwiener, because this particular pipeline had affected her district. That was squashed. It didn't make it out of committee. So as far as TRED's concerned, we see that there's a lot more work to do, but we understand at least where, eminent domain at large is involved, people are a little fatigued. So
Right.
we're kind of putting that on the back burner for the moment, but we're addressing other eminent domain issues. And really one of the things that's kind of popped up is renewables in Texas. So obviously we had broadband that passed, and that's critical for what I mentioned before, allowing for access to telemedicine in rural communities, access to online communication. We have in the healthcare space, rural communities have really struggled with staffing shortages, EMS and other, urgent care facilities closing down. So having that telemedicine piece is really critical, in particular because we have an older population in a lot of our rural communities. But then that also brings in the conversation of infrastructure, right? Which keeps us in that eminent domain space. So it's how are we going to roll out broadband? How is that going to affect landowners on their property? But then also, with the storm Uri that happened in February, obviously all eyes and ears turned to ERCOT, PUC, how is renewables going to be working with oil and gas and electricity to make sure that we don't have that kind of problem that we did before. Because again, going back to what happened with rural communities is not only were people out of water and electricity for days on end, but their livestock, their crops, their business and industry were severely affected by that. So, we're just trying to stay ahead of that and, not only dealing with those types of energy issues, but infrastructure at large as Texas rapidly grows and changes, and what that growth means for rural communities as we see urban encroachment and rural communities kind of changing the dynamic of, who they were and where they're headed.
Yeah, maybe build on that, Jessica. I mean, Texas for sure is seeing this influx in growth, right? Yeah, which is leading to increased development and fragmentation, across the landscape. I mean, do you have any other concerns for our landowners, on this growth?
Yes. So two main things that we're particularly focused on in the Hill Country, which is my backyard, are the subdividing. You have people who own ranches, but it sure does make it a lot easier and get a lot more money in your pocketbook when you sell it to a developer versus maintaining a crop or animals on your property. And so kind of using this as an opportunity to educate developers on how to build thoughtfully with smart growth. So you do maintain some green spaces, encouraging landowners to maybe not sell off all of their property, that they could, develop some of it, but then perhaps work with folks like at TALT to put a conservation easement on some of it. Ways to continue diversification of funding for property, which there are an abundance of other options for landowners who are thinking about revenue generation. That's kind of critical from just like the land perspective. But one of the other things that we're seeing in this area is an issue of groundwater, right? So last night we held a TRED talk on groundwater 101. And really, we're going to start having a conversation about surface water meets groundwater meets wastewater, and then overall infrastructure, because the outside of Austin, San Antonio, Hill Country area, that is a huge region that is exploding with population and industry moving to our state. And so how do we, not only conserve a precious resource like water, but what are some sustainable practices that we can implement? Because, a lot of people who are moving to this region, they're not even from our state. So we have lots of education to do and lots of, opportunities like this, like my TRED Talks, other platforms that we can provide landowner resources and educate not only landowners, but these corporations on how they can work with us to kind of mitigate some of these things. TRED Talks is some of our educational programming. Chad, you participated in a talk on conservation, but that was something that came out of COVID. We recognized that we were not able to connect with our membership and the general public, and then also educating the legislature before they got into session. So we created an online platform of educational tools and have panel discussions on all of these types of issues that are critical to our state.
Yeah, I highly recommend everyone to follow and TRED and definitely watch the TRED Talks. I mean, they're just a great opportunity to really dive in and talk about these issues and hear from a lot of great experts that Jessica brings in on the issues. I think, kind of what you said, is a concern, right? I mean, I live, in Bernie and kind of that hill country area outside San Antonio, right? And we're seeing more and more of these ranches, being bought for development. And you think historically on the ranch, one that just recently sold is, about 1,400 acres, where they had one well, right? That was for the home site and, maybe the livestock pens and things just outside the home. And I think they're set for 850 new homes, so you're looking at, that water draw that, that land historically had one well, and now what's going to happen, right? And it's concerning of how this is going to come about. And I think your point of we all need to kind of just sit down and have this really smart planning and, see how all this kind of comes together. I think one of the other things I think that's going to happen, and we've seen, right, from the pandemic, I think, Jessica, we've seen, probably in the, last year for sure, an increase of even further fragmentation, because I think some of it is broadband, right? I mean, that it's a positive thing because we need it in rural America, but at the same time, people realize that they don't have to sit in Austin or Houston or Dallas, right, for their job. Right. They can do their job remotely, and then they have really good broadband internet, and they can do it anywhere. So, I mean, I think there's this kind of double-edged sword where people felt that, got closer to nature and things of that nature, which is great, right? Because we have a population that's further removed from agriculture and land management and things of that nature. But at the same time, it's increased, I think, some of these issues that you bring up and what your TRED's looking at and trying to solve. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, definitely. It's and that's the interesting thing, because we're pro business, pro industry, but more than 90% of the land in Texas is privately owned. And not only that, it's like 2% of the population. And so making sure that landowners have a seat at the table as we build out our state and address all of the growth and change is really critical. And that is really where, TREAD comes in and stands out among some of the other peer organizations, because, the way that we look at a landowner is you have a quarter of an acre, you have 2,500 acres. Everyone is affected by this change, and rural communities are threatened in a number of ways. And what's interesting is, you have many urban folks who own property in rural areas, yet they are not necessarily aware of the challenges where they might have their ranch, their second home. And so, these are great opportunities to help further educate those folks on the importance of green space conservation, and making sure that, we don't wake up one day and Texas is one giant concrete jungle and we lose the integrity of what we think is so beautiful about our state.
Right. I mean, those are great points, right? And I don't think, I think in general we see the growth, but we really don't understand, really how quick it is coming, right? I mean, where Texas is gaining, on average 1,600 new people a day that are
Right.
moving to Texas.
It's crazy.
It's crazy, right? And you add 1,600 new people, you add, we're losing over 640 acres a day of working lands, rural lands being, developed in some form or fashion, either housing or concrete, something land use change there. And I think that those numbers, I think, are actually low. We haven't, had a current in the last couple of years a rate or research on that. So it's amazing, right, of how all of this is coming about and how we all have to come together and find solutions. And there's not going to be a one solution, one size fits all. It's going to be multiple ways. And I think, one thing on that, Jessica, I mean, we're from TALT's perspective, we're really, right, we're trying to keep this heritage and legacy of these families and property and keeping these working lands working. And one other thing is trying to find, our bread and butter is the conservation easement, right, which is definitely used, but we're trying to find other tools in the toolbox to help empower that landowner. And one of the things that we're really exploring is, how does these ecosystem service marketplaces layer in and provide extra financial incentives back to the landowner for their good land stewardship and another means of a revenue generation, generated for them. What are your perspectives, yours and also TREAD's perspectives on these kind of free market approaches to environment?
That's something that I'm actually learning more about, because I feel like, well, now that we have been able to be in person for some of these conferences, our continued education, we're discovering that this is really a hot topic for everyone, right? So, as Texas is going to be built out, what about mitigation banking? What about carbon markets? What are some ways that we can diversify? And, that actually kind of circles back to the renewable energy piece.
Right.
There are some landowners who, they have enough property where they're considering putting a small solar farm on a parcel of their land, or they are engaging with, the wind farm piece, depending on where you are. And so, it's my understanding that with wind farms, there is some regulation because those go through the PUC, but with solar farms, that's a fairly newer market that's popping up. And again, land is privately owned. And so we want landowners to have that freedom, but it's a matter of kind of, scaling the levels of the freedom as it, affects your neighbor who wants to have the same freedoms. And so
Right.
that's a challenge. But I think that there are so many, other opportunities for revenue generation, and thinking about, like I said, the carbon markets and what that means, and can we create some true infrastructure around that? It will be interesting what comes of the next, 5 years in this space. And I also know that, we have mutual friends who are working on conservation equity management, and utilizing some of this mitigation banking in order to offset construction and development. And so it's really interesting. And people are now really wanting to buy in. I mean, it's kind of like the cryptocurrency of property, right?
Correct.
you know,
Yeah.
we want it's all very interesting. And that's actually something I would be curious to throw back at you in terms of, what is TALT engaged with? Is there any kind of educational programming? Is there anything in particular you're focused on in this space?
No, I think that's great. Yeah, I think I've been in this space for quite a while, and developed markets and different things, and still part of it. And it's kind of been a sort of a aha moment for me, Jessica, in that probably 7 years ago when I kind of started in this space, there really wasn't any momentum, right? And I'd go to corporations and go to different people and talk about the need and why we need this, and from a landowner's perspective and through the landowner's lens. And everybody's like, oh yeah, it's a great idea, but let us sit on the sideline and we'll watch and see how you get this through. And then I would say in the last year, it's like you flip the switch and you have those same conversations with the same organizations, and they're like, well, we needed it yesterday. Where is it? Right. And it's amazing how fast this space is changing. And it's not just changing monthly or weekly, it's almost daily, right? We're seeing corporations that are developing their own carbon markets. We're seeing lots of different marketplaces out there, which is great. But at the same time, when you think of it from a landowner's perspective, it's very confusing, right? You don't know what you don't know. And
Right.
so, and you don't know the right questions to ask, because it is all new. And so that's one thing that we see at TALT is, we really feel like we need a transparent, trusted hub of resources where landowners can come and say, hey, well, I'm thinking about this. Where do I go? How do I get information? And so we're, working towards, Jessica, of trying to develop more information, have information on multiple marketplaces. But just as we do when a landowner comes to us thinking about a conservation easement, right, it's starting to sit down with them and understand their goals and objectives, right, from their family goals, their business goals, operational goals. And we can kind of lay down, I think, and help them say, here are the pros and cons of each one of these marketplaces, and help provide the best information for them to make the best business decision to which one is the right fit. And I think that's really, really important for us. And, I think we're getting to the point now where conservation easements and the marketplaces, these ecosystem service markets, are all kind of intertwined. And it's really kind of a little bit that you were talking about. I mean, it's really about stacking all the values, right? How can you utilize the tool of a conservation easement, take that value and stack of a carbon market, maybe a water market, maybe a biodiversity market, and get, financial incentives on all of it, and increase a premium, and maybe tie that to some of the ag products that you're producing off of your place. So it's all exciting time. It's all new, and it's definitely a fast pace now.
Yes, I'm trying to keep up.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's and that's what's tough, right? Is it is moving so fast, and then if you try to jump in, it's a lot to catch up on. So we're trying to, start marketing and communicating and education components of rolling out information where people can kind of start gaining, that confidence and understanding. So we're definitely looking forward to helping, landowners, as we always are, and be a resource for them.
Yes. Yeah. And I will say, I've discovered, there are some local businesses, at least in our area, like distilleries and breweries, who have come up with some creative ways to, use sustainable practices and be thoughtful on conservation. And that's really promising. And I was actually at a conference the other day, and their corporate social responsibility has really broadened its scope to a sustainability piece for some of these larger corporations as they try to get to net zero and carbon free and all of these things, which I applaud them for the ambitious goals. But regardless of how and if we ever get there, the fact that you have a different mindset now, in particular, the people who have been moving from other states to ours are really wanting to embrace, at least for the most part, embrace, what they could do to help contribute and give back to our state and preserve our resources. And that is something that, I look forward to working with those folks on, and I'm glad that they're looking at different technologies and creative ways of doing such a thing to kind of offset the other piece of the folks who don't, right? Like in every industry, we have good actors and bad actors. And, the more that you and I and, our other peer organizations are out there educating folks, I think we can turn, more actors into good ones. And that is something that I'm excited about. And I'm up for that challenge.
Yeah, no, I think everything is aligning right now, right? The stars are aligning, and we're seeing, full value chain from the landowners and all the way up through the value chain to like those corporations. And I think the innovation and the collaboration is definitely there and will keep increasing. And from a corporate perspective, right? I mean, these issues that you and I have talked about today are hot topics for them, right? So when we start seeing more fragmentation, we start seeing these things, it's alarming for them because, if you're a General Mills, for instance, and you keep losing farmland, where are they going to get their wheat in the future? How are they going to produce their Cheerios, right? And so it's important for them to keep our working lands working as much as it is for us. And so it's finding those avenues of how we work together, incentivize, and it becomes a win-win, right?
Right. I agree.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're already, a year away from the next Texas legislative session. And I know a lot of organizations are already fine-tuning their agenda, right? So what will be front and center for you as we get closer to this next session?
So obviously, property taxes have skyrocketed around the state because of home prices. And that is an issue that we're looking at, ways for mitigation. And that, I don't even know how far we even, we'll just have to see, who all is with us in this space, which I think is going to be everyone, but thinking about how we can, navigate what is to come. There's, for example, you have, like apartments or condos and, other like economical living that's being built in some of these areas to offset the development of your grocery stores, your restaurants, your whatever, in some of these more rural or on the outskirts of a major metro. And, then you have people who are like, well, I don't want that next to my ranch and I don't want this. It's like, yeah, but people can't afford to live and work in the same space. And if we want to decrease congestion, and we're talking about, cars on the road and travel time and quality of life, you can't possibly have everyone living in Bastrop and traveling into Austin, or, people living, like 45 minutes outside of San Antonio. That just doesn't make a lot of sense. And even though we have people who are able to work from home, a lot of people are back in the office. Things are settling down from the pandemic, and the tide has turned. And so it's a matter of just kind of striking a balance between those two things. So we'll just kind of see what comes of that. We're going to be looking at some case studies and putting some task forces together on that. We're also going to be putting a task force together on this, renewable conversation. I think that's not going anywhere, and what is happening with energy. So just kind of having a watchful eye on the PUC and what are some recommendations that are coming out of that conversation with ERCOT and others. And then, what's interesting is with the like the equine space, we've discovered that there's different ways in which people are valuing the work that they do in the equine space, and what kind it like is the horse a product. And so I've had some people come to me with that. I mean, really, the sky's the limit on all of the different issues that we're dealing with, and so I think what we're going to do this coming interim, because we're also coming up on a midterm election, there are lots of balls in the air, redistricting finally getting settled, that we need to kind of see where all of the chips lie, and then we'll probably start throwing spaghetti on the wall in terms of what would probably be the 3 most salient issues that we should address in the next legislative session. So it really runs the gamut at the moment, and it's a matter of just seeing based on all of our collective research what we think is going to gain the most traction, and where we can make those small policy changes to keep not only pushing our state forward, but also making sure that our landowners are protected in the process.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, hats off to you to figure out what's the high priorities, because there's so much on that. And so, I guess, Jessica, a question too is, I mean, I think that's from a state perspective. I mean, is there anything like on a national perspective that's hot buttons that you're looking at that could, kind of trickle down back to Texas?
Yes. And so, I think it's important to be keeping an eye on the Build Back Better. They're looking at, reconciliation package, this infrastructure package, and what does that really mean for our state, right? So, will we see more money for renewable energy? Will we see more money for roadway and transportation improvements, or just funds to address our overall infrastructure to contribute to that relieving congestion, streamlining growth, and more importantly for rural communities, providing jobs, providing funding for these farmers and ranchers. So I think that that's critical, and I hate to say it, but at least in Texas, we only have a legislative session every other year because we don't like a lot of change when it comes to policy and laws. However, what we're seeing at the federal level could actually bring some positives and some much needed funds to our state to address some of these critical issues. So it's, I think that's definitely the main thing to watch. And like I said, with redistricting, just everyone keeping a watchful eye on who stays in office, who's going to be running for office, and then holding those folks accountable as public servants to be our representatives, to make sure that our state is stewarded at not only the state but federal level the way that we think it should be. So that's what I would say. This is kind of a get out the popcorn and watch kind of moment, but it's also a very exciting time.
Yeah, well, that was very well said. Do you have any parting thoughts as we wrap up today?
Well, I do want to end with, where TRED stands out is that we are actually 3 different entities. So we are a C3 that allows for all of our landowner education, our TRED talks, our workshops. But then there's also a litigation arm that, depending on a landowner's issue, we can help them navigate that at the legal level, which a lot of times landowners aren't necessarily savvy or know the steps to take for that additional protection of their property. We are a C6 that is the direct advocacy and lobbying effort. And then we're also a PAC. So going back to, making sure that we have the right people in office who are representing landowners and rural communities. We need to be able to put money behind folks to keep them in office or put them in office so they will advocate for us in the legislature. And I think that's a real critical piece that I think nowadays people are starting to get a little bit more engaged in the political process and having a more, advocacy grassroots approach, which is fantastic. But knowing that there are places like TRED where you can give us support for us to then support those representatives on your behalf. And then we hold them accountable. And that's really the most critical thing is, making sure that, these elected officials do what they say that they were going to do. One of the things we implemented this last legislative session was a landowner champion award. So we were giving out awards and, did a big splash on social media and really made these members feel warm and fuzzy for the good work that they're doing to protect these rural communities. And that's something that we will continue to do. But, you have to make sure that you're advocating for yourself and utilizing the resources that, the organizations like TREAD, like TALT can provide and help us guide you. And even if we don't know the answers, we can help connect you to someone who does. And I think that that's really the most critical thing at this point. Information and knowledge is power, and we need to make sure that we're working together to empower landowners and rural communities to help steward their land the best.
Well, thank you, Jessica and TREAD and all you do, right, for our private landowners and as you articulate, so many ways that you're looking at it in multi-facets, and appreciate that. And now you're kind of expanded work into our rural communities, I think is exceptional as well. So again, thank you, Jessica, for spending a little time and sharing to the listeners about TREAD and all your work.
Thank you, Chad. I really appreciate you having me on today. This has been fun. We'll have to do it again.
We will. And we'll have to do another TREAD talk as well. So again, yes. Again, I just want to highlight people to send them, look up the TREAD talk. Where's the best way, or what's your website, Jessica?
So our website is treadcoalition.org. And we have a YouTube page that hosts all of our TREAD talks. And we have covered everything from eminent domain to water to rural health to conservation. It really runs the gamut, and we're just building upon that because there are so many different conversations to be had. They're only an hour long, so it's not a total snooze fest, but there's some valuable information there. And then also we encourage folks to become a member of TREAD because that allows for additional landowner resources and just access to a whole wealth and breadth of additional knowledge and tools that you can have in your toolkit to best steward your land.
Again, so I would run over there and start looking at some of those TREAD talks. So they're amazing. And again, thanks again, Jessica. And lastly, I just want to remind our listeners to rate and review our podcast to help spread the word of our working lands conservation. Everyone have a blessed one. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Beyond the Fence Line is brought to you by the Texas Agricultural Land Trust, dedicated to conserving the Texas heritage of agricultural lands, wildlife habitats, and natural resources. Find out more at txaglandtrust.org.